Blog Talk Radio.
Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host Mark Snyder, and we're going to be talking about the Billy Meyer case this evening. I don't know what the weather is like in your area of the country, but we've got some unseasonably cold weather on the way with massive clouds on the horizon here. They're talking we may get 70-mile-an-hour winds and 3 inches of snow this evening. And it's been 50 and 60 degrees, nice day. So this is going to be interesting. I'm not even sure if my power is going to stay on, but we'll keep pushing forward for you. Edward Albert Meyer is a man, and he's about 78 years old, 79 years old. He lives in Switzerland in a tiny mountain village called Hinterschmidruti. He was born about 1937, and I think it was the sixth of 7 children. When he was 6 months old, he nearly died from a pneumonia, and he was saved by an extraterrestrial man by the name of Svath, who was from a race of beings that originally allowed themselves to be called the Pleiadians. But they're not from our Pleiades, they're from a solar system called the Polaris solar system, about 80 light years from our Pleiades, in a different space and time configuration. So even though for centuries these people allowed themselves to be called the Pleiadians, they live in a different space-time configuration, and you can imagine that introducing that kind of complexity a couple of 100 years ago on the Earth, or even 50 years ago, would have caused more confusion than anything else. In addition to that, there was kind of a time when, in 1995, when these people were about to leave the Earth, that they revealed their true identity. And the reason they did that, one of the reasons, is so that it's easy to tell people that are studying this material and are really paying attention, because they generally don't use the term Pleiadian, so it began to be a litmus test for people to tell where to go for information. So in 1995, these people left the Earth. There were 2,860 some extraterrestrial humans on the Earth, in bases in North America, Switzerland, and Asia. The Switzerland base had been here for about 300 years. We also have a base, or had a base, in the North Atlantic Sea, and we had another base on the mountain side in western United States, which suddenly the name of the mountain has just vanished from my mind for some reason. I'll look that up in a second. But Mount Mammoth, I believe. There was an extraterrestrial race there called the Hyperboreans, and they had been here for like 130. Mount Shasta was also. I think Mount Shasta was actually the actual base where. Let me look this up just a second. I feel bad about this. Anyway, Mount Shasta, Northern California. There was a small city there of about 700 people. And they were blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. They had been here about 130,000 years or so, which is roughly the time that the Atlanteans came to the Earth. Anyway, the Hyperboreans pretty much stayed to themselves. Every once in a while, when Earth humans would get a little too close, they might have to use one of their beam weapons to shoot people away or to stun them just temporarily. And their golden-colored spherical spacecraft could be seen coming out of the Mount Shasta, and at times possibly Mount Mammoth. And there's an interesting, possibly genuine photograph of such a spacecraft that's found on one of the Jeff Rentz sites. And if I have this link here, I could probably share it in the chat room. And I'll let you decide for yourself. Hi, Gemini Moon, Solon, and Eve. I just want to say hello to the people in the chat room. But Mount Shasta is a very interesting point of discussion here. These Hyperboreans that were here for a while, they actually had a king of wisdom with them who gave Hanok much of his wisdom. Hanok is one of the earlier incarnations of the spirit form of Edward Albert Meyer. And this king of wisdom actually commissioned Noah to build the Great Ark. And this is talked about somewhat in Contact Report 39, but there's big differences between what the Meyer material has to say about Noah and what happened during that time. For example, none of the large animals, none of the large four-legged animals could have made it down from Mount Ararat. So the ark didn't land on the peak of Mount Ararat. And at the time of Hanok, the polar regions were beautiful places filled with palms and tropical vegetation, and you could say it was kind of a paradise on earth. It was the most favorable climate at the time, and there was an uninterrupted summer that took place there. Now, exactly what was going on in the earth at that time, I'm not sure. Maybe there could have been a cloud covering over the earth, a much thicker atmosphere that would hold the heat in. I'm just purely speculating there. But for example, Billy, when he was speaking with Semyase at one time, started asking questions to Semyase about the various quote-unquote gods that operated on the earth, and he asked about other questions as well as Noah. And Semyase explained that Noah Kadnesser, was actually about 10 feet tall, a little over 10 feet tall, and that there was a king of wisdom that kind of commissioned Noah to build this ark. And a very interesting story. This occurred allegedly 100,000 years ago, not at the time that the Bible says. And again, the ark did not land on the peak of Mount Ararat, but landed about 5,000 meters up the mountain. But this extraterrestrial that Noah Kadnesser worked with was named Zebulon, who helped this whole situation. And I got off on this tangent a little bit because I started talking about extraterrestrial bases. And the other base was for a group that was here for a while called the Hasters. And the Hasters were from another galaxy located 483 million light years from Earth, incredible distance. There were about 413 different human races that lived on various planets in this other galaxy, which I believe is called the JENAM galaxy, is what the Meyer material refers to it. And these Hasters were very peaceful and loving people, maybe 1,000 years or so ahead of us in terms of their technology, 1,120 years actually in their overall development. They say that the people of the Earth will be where the Hasters are in about 1,100 years. But they had a base up in the North Sea, under the surface of the North Sea, actually under the ground there, far under the water. And the Plejaren built them a base there so they could study the people of the Earth. It would be like us looking back at 1,100 years about ourselves. And the Hasters were close enough to our development that they could actually interact with Earth humans for like 17 hours before they would start to be affected by our vibrations, before they would start to be affected negatively by our vibrations, because our thoughts are very, how can I say this, repulsive to these higher advanced beings. And that's one of the reasons why we're going to talk about the might of thoughts here in a few minutes, the book, The Might of Thoughts, because that's really the key to getting our life circumstances under control. But anyway, the Hasters as well as the Plejaren have these vibration neutralizing devices that will allow them to interact for a limited amount of time with the Earth peoples. So anyway, I got off on this tangent because I was talking about 1995, how the Plejaren left the Earth. Now, Billy gets roughly 4 or 5 visits a year, I think, from Ptah or Quetzal, who are 2 kings of wisdom that still meet with Edward Albert Meyer. Ptah is the commander of the Plejaren mothership. Quetzal used to be the commander of the bases that were in our solar system. I don't think there are any bases left in our solar system. So this is a very interesting case, the Billy Meyer case, and it's really second to none. And there's really no way to actually describe this other than just jumping right into it. I often try to go back and do the overview as much as possible to build a frame of reference for people's understanding, because there's so much detailed information in this case. As you study it more and more, one of the things you realize is that truth, you have to determine truth for yourself. And that's why I always say the Meyer case says this, the material says this, because truth comes from your innermost self, your innermost contemplations, and your consciousness. You have to figure out what the truth is for you, and you have to have independent thinking in order to be able to determine what the truth is. Now, we all have an I, an inner self, and we have a inner self that is consistent with the creation. You know, there's a universal consciousness that's neither good nor evil. It has laws. It has creational natural laws that apply to all creatures in this universe. There are creational natural laws. One of those laws is the law of striving. In other words, we all continually have to strive. You have to work, whether you're in your day job or whether you're at a hobby at home or whether you're working around your home. And the more work that you do, it's almost consistent with the greater your happiness. I don't know that I could take it that far, but if you're working with the right frame of attitude, with the right frame of reference, then it's almost proportional that the amount of work you put in the various areas of your life, the greater your happiness will be. You will find happiness in your toil. The impulses for working come from the inner self and come from creation. Now, we have a creational power that arises from our consciousness. And that creational power is related to the might of our thoughts. So the might of our thoughts actually, once you learn to master your thinking, that you will become the Lord and Master of the circumstances in your life. And the circumstances of your life grow out of your thoughts. You are not being formed by your environment and your circumstances as much as it seems that way. But it's actually your thinking that's forming your circumstances of your life. You see, good thoughts lead to good feelings. And the German word is Gefühl. And these are feelings that come from thoughts. And you shouldn't let these feelings, you shouldn't suppress these feelings that come from thought. Let them evolve, because these feelings will produce good habits in your life. And then these good habits will lead to good circumstances. So the circumstances grow out of the might of your own thoughts. And there's a tremendous power associated with our thinking. When your thoughts go out into the universe, let's say you have a good, neutral, positive thought, and it goes out into the universe. Well, it gains power as it's out there, and eventually it comes back to you. It's called the boomerang effect, and it will always come back. If it was a good, neutral, positive, healthy thought, it will come back that way. But the polarity can shift. So if it was skewed a little bit too much to the positive, it'll come back to you more negative. It's the way the universal consciousness is constantly working to readjust our thoughts to the neutral positive. And you should ask yourself 3 questions every day. Have I harmonized my personality today to the neutral positive? Have I evolved my consciousness today? And the other thing is, have I helped, for example, my fellow man, animals, plants? Because our goal is to live and help live. So I got off a little bit there in the Might of the Thoughts book when I was talking about extraterrestrial bases, and I went back to the very beginning again when Billy was a young boy growing up in Switzerland, and he started to get these telepathic messages from Sva. And one day he got the message to go out into the forest and wait, because Svath was going to pick Billy up for the first time. And then out of the sky came a silvery pear-shaped craft. Svath stepped out. He's in what looks kind of like a diver's suit, and a kind of a technological force pulls Billy into the ship. And young Edward is looking around in the ship, and he can see there are viewing screens with people on them, and the people that Svath is watching. And Svath tells Billy they're going to go up into Earth orbit. And young Edward gets to see the beautiful blue globe that we call the Earth. And he's stunned by all the things that are happening to him. And Svath explains to him that his life is going to be very challenging, and he's going to be a teacher, and he's going to be a prophet, and he's going to teach an ancient universal teaching called the teaching of the Spirit. And probably the first thing that we learn in the teaching of the Spirit is something about the creation, the universal consciousness. And we have a universal consciousness in our Dern universe. The DERN universe is what we live in, what the Meyer material calls it. We have a parallel universe as well called the Tao universe. And in the Tao universe, there's probably a universal consciousness as well. Now, these two universes were created 46 trillion years ago, and they're adjacent to one another. And Billy's second contact, a woman named Asket, was from a race of people called the Timbers that have developed the technology to get through this barrier between the universes. And they now mostly reside in the Tao universe. But our universe is the DERN universe, the Dern universe, and it has a universal consciousness associated with it. Hello, everyone. I think I'm back in. Somebody in the chat room is still there. If you can let me know, are you hearing me? Somebody please send a little message here. Hang on, folks. Okay, good. You can hear me. Thank you, Shalon. I appreciate it. Skype is not responding, So I had to call in by phone. It's not as good a quality, but I'll go ahead and continue with the show. Sorry about that. We had a tremendous bolt of lightning, and then the whole computer rebooted. So I appreciate folks for hanging around, and there'll probably be about a 10-minute, 15-minute gap in the archive, I guess. So anyway, I was talking about the DERN universe, which is not a person or a personification, which is quite contrary to the belief in God. And again, this is what the Meyer material says here. And it's an impersonal spiritual energy. And the universal consciousness never actually gives commands. Those commandments can come from a higher spiritual plane, but the universal consciousness itself does not give commands. According to Meyer information, it says there is a high spiritual plane called the Patali level that transmitted something called the Decalogue or the Dodecalogue, which actually has 12 commandments in it. There are also creational natural laws, and I talked a little bit about the law of striving, and it's a law that's emphasized very much in the book called The Way to Live. It has a lot of very interesting information on striving, and I recommend that you get this book. I finally read it through for the first time entirely, and it's extremely interesting. And it has things in it that, at least with me, when I first read them, it didn't quite have the impact it did later when I started to think about these things in a little more depth. And one of the things it talks about in this book, and I'll get back on creation in a second, but is something called the inner eye. And therefore it says, and therefore never neglect yourself and esteem your own friendship to yourself. Be caring, open, and honest towards your inner friend, to yourself and to your own eye. Constantly concern yourself with never turning your back on yourself. Have you ever thought of it that way? I've never thought of it that way. And thus never on your inner friend, who you certainly always need. And it says in the Might of Thoughts, it says something similar, that you should cultivate a positive personality for yourself. Again, I'll continue here. Pay heed that the friend does not just turn away from you when you're in dire need of him or her. Therefore, be constantly on your guard, because quite again and again in life there arise situations and moments which quite especially require of you that you remain true to yourself and true to your inner friend. That's the inner self, the inner eye, and your self as it's related to creation. And we were talking about creation. And there's a structure in creation. The universe has 7 belts. We don't see all these belts. You could think of the universe as like an oval or an ellipse in a circular shape, and it has 7 layers in this circle, and they kind of counter-rotate around one another. So there are 7 belts in the universe. And in the 4th belt from the center is the material belt, where all the stars and the galaxies and the solar systems appear. And one of the interesting things I heard Billy say in one of his interviews is that if the universal consciousness had a personality, it could not have created everything that appears in our universe, which I thought was very, very interesting indeed. I don't quite understand it all yet. One of the other things that I see come up again and again in the Meyer information is that the creation is the being and the non-being of life. Another thing which really sparks my interest that I don't completely have my mind wrapped around yet, but
the universe, in its expansion phase, creates spirit forms. And every human has within them a spirit form. And your spirit form is called the Geist form in the German, and it's located in your superior colliculus. And the spirit form is also your spiritual consciousness. You have a material consciousness and a spiritual consciousness. And this spiritual consciousness is far, far, far older than your material consciousness. The spiritual consciousness never dies. And on Earth, the spirit forms of human beings are generally about 4 to 5 million years old. Now, what this means is this spirit form that resides in your superior colliculus has had many, many lifetimes. But one of the creational laws is a special block that's kind of put over your consciousness so that you can live each lifetime anew and have the opportunity for increased spiritual evolution. You see, we would get really hung up if we were always remembering previous lives. Now, later on, millions of years down the road, in the age of recognitions, you will have the ability to recall information from your previous lives. I don't think it comes from memory so much as being able to read the storage bank some way, and I think Billy, in fact, does that. So let me move on a little bit. I want to stay on the creation here. The existence of love in its highest form as universal love. That's one of the creational natural laws is love. It's not romantic love. Romantic love is actually, in the Meyer information, described as false love, because romantic love is very unstable and depends on a person's looks, a person's rapport, maybe their social standing, a lot of things that are very unstable. And a lot of times love can turn into anger and rage and hatred and all sorts of unstable things. But there is a true love, a real love, that's related to wisdom. It's a wisdom-conditioned love. It's very stable. It's based in many ways on observations that we make. And it's based on the ability to use your wisdom. You know, we have a kind of love that's called effective love, and as opposed to the affective love, which I was describing earlier. This effective love is related to that spiritual consciousness again. You have in your spiritual consciousness an area that directs the thoughts and the feelings of your spiritual consciousness. It's called the Gemut. And there is something in the universal consciousness called the Gemut as well. And the universal consciousness, the creation, radiates love. The incredible splendor of nature is the visible expression of the love of creation. And the love of creation is everywhere. And it's the highest principle in all creation. And everything follows that principle in absolute logic. Every tiny plant, every tiny animal fulfills its purpose in love, and love will continually be the purpose for our existence. Now, the creation radiates love, much like the sun radiates light. The sun doesn't radiate light because it has a personal relationship with you. The sun radiates light because of who and what it is. And every plant and animal on earth exists because of the radiating light of the sun. Well, it's similar with the radiating love of creation. Every life form on earth exists because the radiating love of creation. The infinite love of creation, it connects all life because in all life, that love lies hidden. Now, I talked a little bit about the fundamental law of all evolution, which is striving. And without striving, there is no life. And the impulses for striving come from your inner nature, your inner I, the real you. And the other law of nature, the other creational natural law that I wanted to talk about was the bipolar structure, composition of everything. In everything there exists a negative and a positive. Now, we always talk about this in terms of the Might of Our Thoughts book, because the goal is to maintain a harmonious balance in your thought forms. Because neutral positive thinking has a special law of cause and effect in the universe. Neutral positive thoughts will create desirable circumstances in your life. Remember, the circumstances of your life grow out of your thoughts. We're conditioned to think that it's the other way around, but it's really not. Even unconsciously, and this is a big gotcha and something to be concerned about, because your unconscious thoughts can also create undesired circumstances in your life. And unfortunately, much of our thinking is because of unconscious thoughts. So we need to learn to direct our thinking so it's in this neutral, positive form. Now, there are laws of creation that have special impact on the material realm, and these laws of creation would include, for example, the law of reincarnation. And I was talking about that a little bit earlier. In other words, you're not going to escape from this earth because of having only one life. No, that's you have to come back to the circumstances you left the earth in. And this law of reincarnation is a blessing, but it's also quite a challenge, because as the Meyer material explains in the book of the Psyche anyway, we will have as many as 40 million years of reincarnation into a physical body. Now, there are spirit forms on Earth which are a little older than others. These are spirit forms that have been around 8 to 12 million years on the Earth. And these are human beings who came to the Earth on spacecraft in the ancient past. And as far out as that may sound to some people, it is, according to the Meyer material, true that we've had ancient civilizations. Before ours, there was a civilization of Atlantis, which started about 130,000 years ago. Before that civilization, there was a civilization that was led by a king of wisdom called Pelagon. And before that, millions of years ago, was a civilization in the southwestern United States that destroyed itself with nuclear weapons. That's how we got our Death Valley, and there's another valley out there in the west that I can't remember the name of at this moment, that was also caused by warring of these people who came here from other star systems. And the only remnants of these civilizations are in these ancient monolithic and megalithic structures like the Great Pyramids and Pumapunku and other ancient structures that are far older than we realize. And I often say that if we understood our history, if we could somehow understand our history, it would right many of the problems that we have on Earth, because much of our problem is related to our wrong thinking. And the Earth is far, far older than we realize, but the Earth will not be here forever. In fact, the people living on the Earth right now, the spirit forms, will not finish their evolution on the Earth. We will have to go to other planets to finish our evolution. And that is one of the interesting things about these laws of reincarnation. I wanted to also talk a little bit about something called empfinding, which is a block or a factor that exists in the Gemut. And this empfinding is a purely spiritual process of the Gemut. And the empfinding receives swinging waves, which are out of the purely spiritual nature. So, it's interesting, but our spiritual consciousness, the Gemut, it gets swinging waves from an area called the electromagnetic source of life. Let's just say it that way. And these swinging waves travel to the psyche. And all of nature exists in many ways because of these swinging waves. And the person called the sensitivat is one who's capable of this fine spiritual perception called empfinding, and that he or she can receive these special swinging waves. And I like to quote a section in the Goblet of Truth that's entitled What the Truth Knows to Say, that describes these swinging waves and this law of reincarnation that we were talking about. And it describes it in a very beautiful, poetic way. It says, plants, animals, bushes, trees, everything that crawls and flies on the earth is a life form with a spirit form. And these spirit forms are on a journey through time which involve many, many lifetimes. And that death is just the passage to rebirth. Rebirth into the world of pure spirit. And many of these creatures are connected by psychic vibrations, these swinging waves that we were talking about. And if you ever get the chance to go in the forest, be a good observer and a good listener, because you'll hear the birds singing, you'll hear the cicadas and the crickets as they talk. And these are because these creatures in their own way are aware of each other and connected with each other. And you can see it when the birds fly as a group and fish swim together. And you're watching these creational natural laws in operation. Now, I talked about the Decalogue there a little bit. I talked about these commands that don't come from creation, but come from this higher spiritual realm called the Patali level. The creation doesn't actually give commands. But let me talk a little bit about commandment number 1, which says, you shall have no powers and gods and idols and saints other than creation. Let me talk a little bit about prayer from the perspective of the Meyer information. Excuse me. One of the things it says about prayer is it should never be to a divinity or a saint, but that prayers come out of the inner self and the consciousness. They go out and then they come back into the inner self, into the consciousness, where they bring about, through the might of your own thinking, they bring about a fulfillment of some desire. So this is the way that prayer actually works, and not the way that it's talked about most of the time now. I'm going to bounce around a little bit onto some other topics here that talk about current events, for example. Believe it or not, the Islamic terrorists, according to Meyer information, do not really represent Islam. And just as other terrorists do not represent other religions. And that's one thing we have to be mindful about. The other thing that I want to talk about is the mass migrations of peoples that is occurring now. And this is something that Billy wrote about a long time ago, that the mass migrations of peoples threaten actually humankind. And we have an idea of multiculturalism that is very simple-minded, and their multiculturalism doesn't really work. In other words, there are people that are so different that they shouldn't really be together in the same nation or the same group. Now, eventually, after we get through these 800 years of this transition period, which is the third millennium, maybe that'll be different. Maybe when people understand enough of the creational natural laws and enough of the information in the Maya material, all of our thinking will be enough alike that we'll be compatible. But right now we're not. Let me talk a little bit about the old prophets of the Nocodamian line. One of them was Jeremiah, and the other was Elijah. And they forecasted the negative consequences from the mixing of peoples on the earth, which is now becoming a reality and will still become vastly worse in the coming decades and centuries. Fundamentally, the worldwide overpopulation is the cardinal cause for this, because for more and more human beings in the world, there will be less and less living space. Less food, less healthy air, less drinking water, less jobs, less housing, less recreation areas, less healthy nature, less agricultural land for cultivation, and so on and so forth. The uncontrolled insanity of global overpopulation brings about other problems too, which is the CO2 emissions and other things. And one of the tremendous dangers of overpopulation that I like to talk about is the fact that our forests are being destroyed. And that's one reason why I live here, basically adjacent to a state park. A very unusual set of circumstances I was blessed to find. But as you go into the bigger cities, you can see more and more where trees are being chopped down. Well, the forests moderate the weather. In other words, they slow the winds down, like we're having these heavy winds here. They slow the winds down. They also create shade so that the soil doesn't get too hot, because when the soil heats up, that heats up the air, and then you have these hot and cold belts slamming together, which creates humongous storms and tornadoes and things like that. So these forests, they should be worldwide. They should be massive. And the forests moderate the weather. The moderate weather creates the environment for humankind, for animals. As we destroy more of these forests, our weather is going to be more like it was before there were people on the earth, before we could survive. So we're going to take our planet back to the time when it cannot support life if we keep destroying these forests. Let me talk again a little bit about the predictions of Jeremiah and Elijah. And of the peoples of the earth will intermingle, and many terrible things will emerge from it, and much sickness, and much infirmity, and hatred, and terror, and revenge, and many deaths. Warnings were given, and given in droves, but where is the rationality of the human being? Nowadays, it is being Billy Edward Albert Meyer, as the last prophet of the series of 7 on the earth, who has repeatedly pointed out to the destruction of the earth by the human beings and the consequences of mixing people. Billy's been talking about this since the 1950s. Let me tell you about something that's said in the Goblet of Truth about this on chapter 28, sentence 150. Through your self-acquired characteristics of concentrating solely on the material, and I want to just put a highlight there for a second. Through your self-acquired characteristics of concentrating solely on the material. One of the things that Semyase said in the early contacts to Billy, which she emphasized many times, which I've thought about a lot, that we are material intellectual thinkers on the earth. meaning that we do not listen to the deepest intuitions that come from the human spirit. And those deepest intuitions hold that incredible wisdom from your spiritual consciousness. But through your self-acquired characteristic of concentrating solely on the material, you human beings of Earth have effectively made yourselves to masters of the coarse, substantial world. And as a result of your doing, handling, and acting, the material world has also become dependent on you. But you use this dependence of your world to torment it in every imaginable wise. For example, through chemistry, irresponsible exploitation of the resources. And I don't think the Pleiadians use fertilizers in chemistry the way we do in our soils. Through overpopulation and the immense resultant problems which can no longer be solved, such as the destruction of the climate, and that's what I was talking about earlier. You destroy the forest, you destroy the climate. Mass migrations is what we're talking about with all these people. Water and food scarcity, hatred, war, torture, and the destruction of the environment and nature. The eradication of many animal, bird, and fish species. For better or for worse, your world has become dependent on you and perforce suffers in its own kind and wise under your terror and through the destructions which you cause upon it and to it. That's Goblet of Truth, chapter 28, sentence 150. And this is a letter that Billy wrote on July 5th, 1951. Now, that was about the time he was having his contacts with Ascot, and he was pretty young then. I think he might have been in his teens at this time. And the time is already coming when the peoples will begin to mix, when many human beings will flee from their homeland countries to find shelter somewhere else in foreign countries. And there will be many refugees who have to struggle to maintain their lives, while very many others creep into the structures of the better positioned countries as economic refugees. So what consequences will we see from these mass immigrations? Streams of refugees have what human, societal, economic, and environmentally related consequences? Well, let me read to you here what the Meyer information has to say. Due to the many human beings thoroughly mixing from different cultures with foreign languages, customs, traditions, religions, and so forth, the danger grows that the native human being feels like a stranger in their own country. And we can see that going on in Germany now and in Sweden. And their sense of belonging and the feeling of identity to their own culture is hollowed out. People feel like they don't belong in their own country. Everywhere on the streets, on trains, buses pass, etc. Excuse me, the human being nearly only gets to hear foreign languages, as well as for them different and strange odors from kitchens and from the bodies of other human beings. This in turn may lead to the rising mistrust in the native society and affects the human being's feeling of belonging together. And one of the things that this time is this third millennium that we're living in, one of the things that's supposed to happen is confusion and maliciousness is being spread all over the earth. And I think the confusion is related to the immigration of all these different cultures. And the forced immigration now, which gets me back to the secret dark order. I think this is one of the motivations of the secret dark order, what we call the New World Order. That's just my own information. I haven't read that yet exactly from Billy. But Billy does talk about the secret dark order in the Goblet of Truth. Slowly but surely, the social systems are being undermined by illegal immigrants, and I think that is done on purpose or out of total stupidity. In the case of Angela Merkel, that could be the case. And the incoming fraudulently obtained asylum seekers, which in reality could remain without danger in their own country and should help out there with general developments. Anyway, this is a very interesting article that goes on and on here about the mixing of peoples, and this is something I really didn't know anything about. I had no idea of this. And in Contact 270, as we're running out of stream now, but let me just read this. This is in Contact 270, which occurred in 1999. Billy says, my next question concerns the mixing of peoples. You and Quetzal, as well as Semyasi, all of you have previously explained to me that the mixing of peoples in great amounts, as they, for example, come about through wars, asylum seekers, and the whole migrations of partial migrations of peoples, as well as the great immigrations and so forth, portends an extremely great danger for the existence of humankind, namely due to the wide varied mixing of bloods and genetic influences, etc., as a result of which the human being would become soft and unable to cope with life, as well as becoming susceptible to disease. As a result, as you've explained, over time would emerge such degenerative changes in human beings. So somehow, in some way, the mixing of people will actually cause degenerative changes in human beings. Well, this is a topic that we can talk about more on a future show. I'm going to have to this article, and also later on I can tell you where you can find it. Folks, I appreciate everyone that came to the show. I apologize for the lightning strike or whatever it was here that took me off the air for about 10 minutes. Anyway, you've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder, and we'll be on this evening on Revolution Radio. Please join us between 8 and 10 p.m. Eastern, and we'll talk to you then. Have a good evening.